Welcome back, everyone. Before we go on to the next session, I just want to mention that at any time during the presentations you have a question, please use the Q&A box. We will try to, if we have time, we'll be asking the questions to the presenter. For those questions we aren't able to ask the presenter during the conference, we will forward those questions to the presenters to get an answer. So thank you. And I hope everybody had a good meal break. Our next discussion is the issue of regaining pilot proficiency with Randy Rolls. Randy owns Helicopter Institute in Fort Worth, which operates Airbus, Bell, MD, and Robinson helicopters, and he serves as the HAI Board of Directors. He has been an FAA pilot examiner for more than 25 years for all helicopter certificates and ratings, and holds an FAA Gold Seal Flight Instructor Certificate and a Master Flight Instructor designation. Randy, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. So, hello everybody, Randy Rolls here. Go ahead and share a screen with you. And we are going to talk about regaining pilot proficiency. This is a very important discussion today. First thing, before we get started, I would like to thank the FAA and all of the industry participants that have effectively put this particular show on. Of course, this is the 2020 International Rotorcraft Safety Conference, and I've been fortunate enough to participate for the last couple of years with the safety conference. And I'll tell you, just the attendance alone, just you being here, is a key element to safety and your safety, industry safety, and throughout the industry, really. Our perception within the helicopter industry, both in the United States and globally for our international marketplace that is represented here today at the safety conference, perception of safety is a very big deal. One of the things that's going to enhance safety, of course, as we get through a post-COVID-19 world, and that's going to be for aviators to understand that, we've had a downturn. We've not been flying as much as we have been. So we're automatically dealing with potentially a decrease in pilot proficiency. So this presentation for the next hour, I want to talk about the things that we're seeing as an industry with pilots that maybe aren't flying quite as much, and how we're going to get you back, how you're going to develop a plan and be proactive to get yourself back to a safe level of proficiency to get back, out there into the industry and kind of do what you've been doing as a professional, whether that be a private individual acting as a professional and doing things in a professional manner, or as a commercial aviator in what we would consider the more normal, professional environment. What I want to do is kind of talk about a little history. So the first thing we have is the historical aspect. Where all this got started, we were doing well. You go back to the beginning of 2020, from the helicopter perspective, we had Heli Expo, and Heli Expo, for probably the first time ever, we held the world's largest helicopter exposition was held in Anaheim, California. We had record attendance. We had, people coming in and all kinds of business and deals. It was just fantastic. And, the industry, not just in helicopters, but a lot of people didn't even realize this. Boeing was introducing a new airplane, a Boeing 797. It was a scheduled launch in 2020. Airports were full. It was amazing. And, you saw runways and taxiways just full of airplanes waiting to go. And then all of a sudden, we fast forward after the COVID-19 announcement, and now we're seeing, literally just a matter of months later, record furloughs from airlines that are allowing pilots to leave, and the airlines, these lines of airplanes that were on taxiways that were waiting to take off are no longer waiting to take off. Right now they're parked, and that downturn and that rapid downturn, it caused a lot of things to happen. Of course, there was a time last year, say in 2019, we saw a rapid reduction in the availability of qualified helicopter pilots, to the point where there were data points showing that we were going to be in a very large pilot void, if you will, with qualified helicopter pilots. The data, that reflected that was very accurate of its time. Well, as you saw the airline downturn per the, kind of the chart that I have in front of you on the screen, we see massive furloughs of some of the airline pilots. Well, a couple of years ago, we started the Rotor 2 airline group, or also known as RTAG, and several others, where we were reaching back. The airlines were so short of pilots that they were reaching into the helicopter cadre, and they were pulling some of those qualified aviators out and moving them into the airlines. And that allowed us to have really some of the newer pilots and lower experienced pilots to kind of fill some of those gaps. In March of 2019, Vertical magazine actually put out an article, "Does the helicopter industry have a people problem?" This was talking about qualified helicopter pilots that were available to fill the jobs and the missions that we had available. So this was a very real situation. So as COVID-19, of course, developed, we all lived through it. We saw that there were some downturns in the industry. Many folks are not doing the flying that they were doing before. Some lost their jobs. Some folks just weren't able to fly as much as they were flying previously. And the industry reflected this in many different ways. There were some organizations out there that had a temporary downturn, and we're starting to see some rebounding to that effect. However, there are other organizations out there that were permanent. They closed their doors, and maybe the tourism side of the business, we saw some downturn there simply because as the economy drops, as the regulatory elements changed, as the world went on this lockdown, we saw a discretionary income change. We had some folks that, tourism, it wasn't just about the money, they weren't allowed to come here. And those things from a domestic US perspective affected us greatly in the tourism business. So you as a pilot, you have a situation to where, you have skill sets that need to be maintained. Those skill sets we look at as being proficient. However, the legality aspect of what you do is what we call currency. So the question we initially ask ourselves, and the basis of this presentation is, how do you remain current as a pilot? How do you get yourself back to that position where you're at before, or sustain your profession, sustain your skill sets while we're allowing the world to right itself? Well, there's a cost metric with all of this, and there's no doubt, but that is, of course, balanced with the pilot capabilities that are required for the types of jobs, missions, and just normal everyday flying that we may do. And these are data-driven facts where we see the skill sets and the proficiency requirements for an aviator to be able to go out and fly safely. There's a lot of different ways that you can keep yourself either proficient, whether mentally proficient, physically and basically skill set proficient. And that's going to be number one, get in the books. There are a lot of web-based interfaces that are available for you to go in and keep that knowledge fresh. And just like right now, we see this virtual conference that's available to you. The FAA has done a fantastic job of putting this together, the team that put it together, a lot of great people coming in here and sharing their experiences. Well, this is a piece of that pie. And so you're able to engage and kind of not only see where the industry is currently, but have an idea of the plans moving forward. And that allows you to plan around that and those phased releases of the ability to travel and certain things that you may need to do to be able to get yourself to a location, maybe a school or a facility to get your currency back up. While you're flying, even in a COVID-19 world, there are things you can do. Maybe it's such as here in the picture, if you have to wear personal protection equipment in the aircraft. Some of these may have limitations based upon the type of flying that you're doing, but you do have the ability to engage in certain flight environments safely, and that's a key component to it. The other part here is what we're doing now on a virtual webinar, things of that nature, to where you can go into organizations that have some of these virtual conferences. I know in the law enforcement world and some of the other mission segments that we have, they've consistently put on seminars and things of that nature for those participants in those mission segments to be able to continue having discussions and safety best practices discussions to where they can at least keep the mental aspect of what you're doing and keep it going. So it's very, very important that you keep yourself engaged from a recency perspective so that your skill sets, your mental skill sets don't diminish. Now, I've said the word proficiency many, many times, and I definitely want you to understand that there is a difference between currency and proficiency. However, we have to make sure the currency piece is in play. The FAA recognized this. And so, back in May, we had the SBAR 118 that came out, and it's been updated most recently, to my knowledge, October 1st, 2020. And what the SFAR did was it expanded certain currency requirements for certain rules or regulations within the industry. So Part 61 is a great example, which is where we find all of those items required for pilot certification. So we may find things such as your flight reviews or the folks that are flying Robinson helicopter products. They've had some relief in the SFAR 73 area and maybe some of your recent flight experience. These things were given a little bit of relief so that, again, we can get through the COVID-19 pandemic and the COVID-19 world. There's also elements with regard to, you can see medical certificates, some practical test elements, things of that nature to where the FAA recognized that we were going to have a challenge based upon a shutdown. Not only people being able to travel is another thing. So the FAA recognized this, and they allowed us to maintain a currency metric that may not, and here's the most important part, may not complement the proficiency metric. And that is something that we have to talk about, because does a difference exist between currency and proficiency? It is without a doubt that there is a difference between the two. Something that you have to embrace through this whole discussion is that there are many pilots that were current that were not proficient and have had accidents. There are pilots out there that may not have been current and should not have been flying, but they flew successfully because they were proficient at what they did. So proficiency really is an earmark to our safety system. You want to be a proficient pilot. And we've got to understand in this discussion that proficiency is not always about our hands. It's not just the skill sets of manipulating the flight controls. A major important part of our proficiency metric is going to be our mind, aeronautical decision making. We break many, many more aircraft having poor decisions than we do by having the poor skill sets within our hands. We may, in fact, make decisions that will lead us down a path where we exceed the capability of our piloting skill sets to keep us out of trouble. So proficiency, both in thought and in the manipulative aspect of flying the aircraft, are key components to maintaining a safe industry. Key component here about currency versus proficiency, and this is from an FAA source, as you can see, being current under the regulations mean you've met the requirements to act as pilot in command of an aircraft. Being proficient means that you are fully competent in those actions. And in other words, you understand the normal operations as well as the what if readiness. If it occurs, you're ready to react for your type of flying. And that's another piece that's very, very important. It's not just flying straight and level. It's not just A to B. It's what you're doing with the aircraft. In our industry, there's probably more than 50 mission segments that we see in the helicopter industry easily that are as diverse as you can think. So, when someone's out there maybe doing a long line job, right? Or somebody's firefighting, or somebody's maybe doing power off landings, or somebody's doing human external cargo jobs. These requirements between each one of those are very diverse. So when you're looking at a proficiency metric, it has to blend into what you're doing with that aircraft. Thus, your proficiency plan that you put together must have an end game as to what you're going to do with that aircraft. Now, there are ways that you can, maintain proficiency, absolutely, right? There are ways that as a basic pilot skill, and when I say basic pilot skill, I'm benchmarking that off of you're a pilot, you may hold a commercial pilot certificate, and very often when we say maintain a certain skill set, we're referring to a minimum standard. That would be the PTS for helicopters or the ACS for some of our fixed wing folks and other certificates and ratings. But the standards by which the FAA puts out for you to obtain that certificate and to keep it, it's an important aspect to understand that is the minimum standard to obtain certification. Just because we maintain that same certification standard when you go out and do some of your basic proficiency tests and checks does not mean that is the adequate proficiency to be able to do certain mission segments. So we definitely want to get you to that point. We want to make sure that your personal proficiency plan gets you to that end game. That's going to require you to be an active role. For basic certification, basic currency, and basic pilot certificate proficiency, the PTS is a great benchmark so that you know where to be above, and we can get some of that through proficiency training programs. Again, the WINGS program, this is a great way to have an active participation on an annual basis. Keep it going. The FAA gives you great benefits for that. The other part of it for some of you folks that maybe are going to fly under 135, or if you're receiving a flight review, those items, those times of training and checking are grand opportunities for you to go out and have your skill sets evaluated. Now, I'll tell you, as a career instructor, I have an opportunity to fly with, and a majority of the work that I do is train the trainer courses. I spend a lot of time with instructors. We spend a lot of time on what I'll call instructional intervention techniques. And as a career instructor, it's sad to say that we break many more aircraft in training than actually break out in the real world. We have a lot of escapes, as we say in training, and the instructor may miss a few of the red flags that may be identified in the training program or in the aspect of conducting a maneuver, and we end up having a hard landing or something occur that you would rather not have happen. And the instructional intervention elements are something we have to think about. And I like to employ this to our instructors that are out there, implore you to understand that just because you're meeting your pilot currency / proficiency metrics do not correlate to being qualified and proficient to provide instruction in those same aircraft. Just like you brought your pilot skills back up and you focused on just meeting a minimum PTS standard, you may in fact, and you should, desire to have the skill sets reviewed for your instructional capabilities to make sure those instructional intervention items, the timing, the recognition for that timing, all of those items are looked at as well. In many, many cases with customers, we find that the customer will come in and I'll ask, would you like to maybe do some training from the opposite seat, the instructor position? And when they come in for recurrent training, they'll often say, no, I'm quite comfortable in the pilot seat. I would like to just sit over there. So it happens in many cases that instructors, after they receive certification, very rarely are their instructor skill sets ever looked at as long as they hold that flight instructor certificate. Now, some folks under Part 135, they receive a proficiency check for the pilot and command capability, but they also will receive a check when they do some of their instructor capabilities as well as their check pilot capabilities, and that's done at least every 2 years. So I encourage you that if you've been one of the ones that have lost currency or lost proficiency, more importantly, over this COVID time frame, you engage an instructor, a mentor, someone that you have, and have those skill sets reviewed, not only as the pilot, but also as the instructor, a very key component to the safety of our industry. Why is this important? Currency versus skill, there's a lot of data on this. And in this Did You Know profile, the data shows that pilots with less flight time over a 90-day period have proportionally greater risk of accident. In other words, if by quarter, which is why we do 90-day currency, right? If you're not flying and you don't, the less you fly, and of course this is with anything, then your risk of having an accident is greater than someone that flies more often. Now, again, this is a skill set, often a skill set discussion, but that's not always the case. The fact that you're not exercising, again, these abilities as an aviator, you're not making decisions either. So it's affecting the skill set to wiggle the sticks, but it's also affecting the mental aspect of making good decisions. In some cases, you may in fact outfly your planned weather scenario with changes, and because of our lack of currency, thus we are lacking proficiency, we may be too far ahead of the aircraft and not making the decisions that we need to make. In many cases, we'll refer to the fact that if you're flying a helicopter, land. If you get ahead of the aircraft, if the weather's doing things you don't like, if you have something you shouldn't be in, land the helicopter. Now, surgery. This is off the topic of aviation, but one of the data points show that patients undergoing surgery with doctors and surgeons that are coming off a break have a proportionally higher chance of death. This is a fact. So in the longer the break that the doctors were out with, so the higher the risk of some of these things. So it is a very, very real item to say that it doesn't matter with a profession that you're in. It has to do with a lot of the recency of experience. The more proficient you are, the safer we all are. One last bit down here, and this is back in the 90s. There was a video American Airlines made. A Czech pilot, a Czech airman, Mr. Vandenberg, or if I remember, Vandenberg, if I remember correctly, I'm sorry, but he was a Czech pilot with American Airlines, and American sponsored this, and it was called Children of the Magenta Line. It's recommended viewing if you haven't seen it, and the topic of this is the ability for crews to de-escalate technology as they're having issues with the airplane. The aircraft, they don't just de-escalate at one layer at a time. Put your hands on the aircraft and have the skill sets to be able to fly it. And they found that pilots' flying skills deteriorated with frequent use of automation, right? They became dependent. Well, this is kind of no different than just not flying. You get in the aircraft, you punch on the autopilot, it does all the work, and you're not exercising those skill sets that you've been given, the ability been given to fly these aircraft. Thus, your skill sets will affect your proficiency. These are facts. These are not opinions. So you want to make sure at all times, depending upon what you do for a living, who you are, what type of profession you are, whether you're that private pilot or you're the ATP, whether you're just flying a Robinson R-22 around the traffic pattern and enjoying helicopter flight, or you're flying a helicopter doing utility work with a human being hanging underneath that helicopter in an HEC world, it does not matter. You have to maintain a level of proficiency that's adequate for the flying that you do, and recognize the fact that when accidents occur, all the things you've heard through this safety seminar, every one of those accidents, nobody woke up that morning and saying, I'm going to go out and crash today. They didn't do that. Things happen to them that could happen to you and me, and we've got to make sure that we spearhead our way to not let that happen. We have to be proficient, both mentally and through the aptitude of the flight controls at which we're flying. So the FAA has recognized, and we've articulated this, that they have recognized that there are regulatory challenges that we're dealing with as an industry right now. I can tell you that I was almost going to use the word victim, but probably inappropriate. But I've been among those that have had delays in process simply because, there's just nobody home right now. And, it's hard to get certain things done. And that's just a fact. They have a stack of things to do within, the local district offices and those inspectors that are there. Additionally, in the helicopter world, we've had the perfect storm. The FAA is not exactly filled to the top of the rim with helicopter pilots. The helicopter side of the house and the helicopter expertise is a little bit shallow. The FAA has recognized this and they're trying to fill that void. But as we as helicopter operators have needs then if in fact you're working with the FAA, so this is more of a domestic thing for us, but I'm sure the international folks that are watching in your regulatory authority, just replace the regulation numbers and you're probably dealing with the same problems. But for us, just basic certification, maybe trying to get through some updates and policies or new aircraft on a certificate under Part 135 through conformity. Trying to get checks done under 141. Maybe you have a chief instructor that departed, you need another one designated. All of these things are issues the FAA is trying to deal with. Manual updates and procedural updates. These are things that also have been very, very challenging to get through. And then, of course, for the exemptions, waivers, and deviations, these are definitely things that may be needed by the operator in a very short amount of time, and we haven't been able to get some of those things done. This has not gone unheeded by the FAA, and I think it's important that all operators understand this. Create a manner of communication with your principal and inspectors, and make sure that you have a manner or process to be able to have these discussions with them. That's a key component of being able to move forward on issues that you're dealing with in the best timings possible. Now, we're all in this together, every single one of us, and again, not just domestically, but the international front, and we're all dealing with similar problems. So the patience to get through it is key, but I go back to what this discussion is all about, is the pilots. Make sure you are proficient at what you do. So I'm now engaged in a discussion with myself, and again, this is just in thought. I need to become proficient again. I know that my currency is coming to an end. I know that I've been given, a regulatory benefit from the FAA to extend some of my currency elements. And now I've got to do something about it, right? So the first thing you want to do is create a plan that works for you. What works for you? Where do you start and what gets you all the way down to the end of that? And you want to build some level of a risk plan, right? Know that to try and mitigate risk. The idea of having a risk plan or some type of a risk assessment is to have some mitigation strategy. So if you're willing to look at this, then you have to be willing to do something with it, do something about it. So you're going to identify your currency and your proficiency risks, and you have to remember that the COVID exemptions, as it says on the bottom of the screen here for Part 61 and 135, they may be legal, but have very, very little to do with your proficiency. The operators need to be the ones, the managers, the chief pilots, the directors of operation. You have to know this. The reality is a pilot wants to work. A pilot will say, and we'll see this in later slides, a pilot may come in and say, I feel proficient. I'm ready to go do this job. I am ready to go to work. I am totally comfortable to do what you're asking me to do. When in fact, their proficiency may not be there. Although the FAA or the regulatory body that you're working with may have given you provision to allow them to do that, it is up to you as the operator, the management team, to make sure that you maintain and effectively manage a safe team out there. Let them go on the things that only you have decided that they're proficient to do. So you need to be a part of the decision-making process. As I said, identifying your currency and proficiency risk, be proactive in identifying that stuff. Create it, look at it, go to industry, find out where the risk exists, and then use a flight risk assessment tool or a FRAT that addresses currency for flight, something that actually talks about it. And it may be something that relates specifically to the type of flying that you do. Now, I've said multiple times through this presentation so far, I've said, you have to be a part of this. It's an active process. You got to get engaged. I do a lot of night vision goggle training, and I tell you, whenever it's dark out there and you're doing an auto rotation, or if you're going to do a power off landing to the ground, I will tell all my customers, and I say, look, when your eyeballs are pointing at whether you're doing an auto rotation with a turn, whatever, you have to get your eyeballs where you're going. You have to engage the target. It's the same thing here. You have to engage the target. You have to engage yourself into this process. So I'll give you a few things. Transfer that risk, right? bring an instructor in to be able to go, that is proficient, that can help you work through those items. Maybe I'm training for something that would be a confined space. Well, I can train those maneuvers in an open area initially, eliminate the risk, whatever that may be. When I get there, maybe mitigate the risk, maybe start things in the daytime and allow myself to work in night operations. Maybe that's something that can mitigate the risk. And at the end, after I've transferred, eliminated it, and I've mitigated it, maybe I'm at a point where I can now accept the flight. I can accept the tasking that puts me back into that safe environment where I need to be. That's the only way. That is the only way to validate that you are proficient and ready to go back and do what you're supposed to do with these aircraft. And that's the key component to all of this, right? That's an important piece. So the training to get there is a process of mitigation. As I said, if you're going to do a risk assessment, if you're going to go through the process of actually checking these things off, then you're going to have to make sure that you have a mitigation strategy to do this. One of the important notes here is that the data shows that it's not the skill sets, it's not wiggling the sticks that suffers immediately when you are out of proficiency. With time, it's right here, situational awareness. What's going on around us, where we're going. Situational awareness being your perception of a situation, right? Your comprehension of that situation and how you project what's coming next. That is where you will falter. So that is why you want to have yourself in a very, very comprehensive and aggressive proficiency plan. Scanning is something that breaks down. We have a tendency to have to remember what an indicator means or what the number range is. I may spend more time eyeballs inside than I'm outside. So our basic scan, both internal to external, may swap. I might be spending way too much time inside that aircraft. That's a key component of something you, with time and practice, even sitting in the hangar, going through it, staying in the books, can help with, right? And this goes back to what I said earlier about your best practices. Things that you used to do a month ago, you might not be doing now. 6 months ago could be even worse. All right, so that's a key component there. Don't reduce your standards. Do not do that. The standards are the key. We don't want to reduce our standards and say we're good enough. Mediocrity has nowhere allowed in our industry. Mediocrity is not something that we can have, that we can do and accept. So don't lower a standard. Lowering the standard can get you to a level of mediocrity that we do not want and do not accept. And don't make excuses or allowances for a currency issue. Don't do that. You know, develop your plan, put it where you want to be, how you want to get it there, benchmark it across what you believe are industry best practices or those that have been provided to you. There are organizations out there, that's what they focus on. Adapt to those and work with them. One of the things we recommend is a tiered approach, a tiered industry as it relates, or entry back into industry. And that would be a situation to where if I am I've been out for a little while and maybe I'm that long line pilot with a human external cargo. Well, I might not go 6 months of not doing that and come back and re-engage immediately back into that work. I may have a tiered approach to get myself back to that proficiency metric. And it may not be 1 phase to 2 phase. It might be a multi-phased approach, but that's something that you as an individual, and I go back to the operators, make sure you're thinking along these lines and support your staff so that they have an opportunity to engage the aircraft and be able to get those pilots back to that tiered approach or to that end result that that you're going to need them to be. Safety is the key. And we don't ever want to be at the end of this looking in the rearview mirror and say, boy, I wish I had done that better. We have an opportunity right now to make sure that we engage and we do this properly the first time, and I think we'll find the great outcomes are going to come from this. It's all about being prepared. If you are going to mitigate this process and you decided that training to proficiency is something that we're going to do, then plan for it. Sit in the aircraft, go to the hangar, go out and visualize what you're going to look at, maybe a cockpit diagram, get your scan back where things are, study the numbers, limitations, emergency procedures, get the mental aspect of what you're doing out in front of the practical application of flying the aircraft. You can do this. It's free. That cost metric versus the task symbology I showed you earlier in an earlier slide, you know, sitting and chair flying, look at the books you have, reading, that's free. Doesn't cost you anything, and it really gets your mind prepared, moving 3 steps ahead, getting your proficiency back. It's very, very important. So getting into the books, getting into the diagrams, actually, you know, really putting your mind around those items that are required for you to be proficient again are the key steps. And to be frank, if I'm the instructor, when I have somebody come back to me that wants to really get proficient, I love to see when they come in and they start showing me what they've done, because I'll ask them, I'm going to engage you. You know, what have you done to this point? I want to complement the books that you've read, or I want to complement the type of studying that you've done so that I can enhance that knowledge and get you back to that proficient standard and that proficient metric much quicker. Simulation is a wonderful tool. We here with Helicopter Institute, we focus very heavily on simulation in all of our programs. And I do not care. I have very little care of whether or not I have an FTD or a flight simulator that is certified for a function, if in fact that function will complement the pilot's learning. Now, I may not be able to count the flight time. I may not be able to credit this toward a certification file, but I can darn sure as an instructor help develop skill sets based on simulation usage that is relevant. And that is an important piece. Something as simple as a desktop computer can help with just the basic scan where you're going to go flowing through maybe a pre-flight or pre-check type of checklist in the aircraft. Very, very effective tool. Maybe instrument procedures, flying approaches, all of those things can be enhanced and will be enhanced by your aggressive use of simulation. It is a wonderful, wonderful tool as long as it's relevant and somewhat accurate to what your end goal is. This is a very, very important piece of the plan. Very, very important piece of that plan. I think, you know, when you go through a good CRM class or a crew resource management training session, you'll find that there are some hazardous attitudes that get brought to bear. And it's interesting, not all of these hazardous attitudes that will come up do not just, you know, come to the top because you're a bad person. Every personality type has the ability to exhibit hazardous attitudes just based upon maybe, I mean, something as simple as being hungry can make you grouchy, you know, being tired can make you want to get home to your own bed. There are things that can lead to you having some of these hazardous attitudes. And a couple of things I want to talk about here is like invulnerability. I'm fine. It's like riding a bike. My proficiency skill is there. I am good to go, right? This can happen. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is that pilot that's been out of it, wants to get back to work, and they feel great. However, they may have that one little item that they're lacking, that one piece, and that one piece can be the piece that causes that accident to occur. So again, a slow progression, but getting us back to a proficient standard. Resignation. I know it's been a while. I'm rusty. It is what it is, right? Just so you guys know, I might bounce the helicopter a little more today than I did yesterday. That's not always the best plan. And bouncing that helicopter might be the airframe damage that leads to either an immediate aircraft grounding or something worse that could come later. These aircraft are like elephants, as they say, they never forget. So we want to make sure that that's not something we do. And again, when we talk about impulsivity, there's work to do. I don't have time to go out and do this training. I don't have time to go out and get proficient. I've got to get revenue back into the company. And I will tell you, that is a very, very real position that companies find themselves in today's environment. Revenue production and the ability to turn revenue is a key component in a world where revenue downturn occurs. And these are the types of things where, as I've said, I don't believe people get up in the morning and say that, you know, we're going to do these things. However, it happens. There are situations in a helicopter incident that I can tell you, there was a preliminary report on a helicopter accident that showed the pilot's medical and their proficiency checks were not valid. They hadn't done flight reviews, and the pilot, for whatever reason, decided they were going to fly anyway. So people are making decisions to do things that, and this was before COVID. This was something from quite some time ago. So if we know the human element, which you've heard a lot about in this seminar, the human element can lead to these decisions that will take not only a proficient pilot. We're seeing some people will go as far as to say, I'm not current, I'm still going to do it anyway. That's a problem. For you, the ones that are attending this seminar, we believe you're already making the first step for safety by being here. Thus, you're not going to be one of those folks that make those decisions. We believe that you're going to work on proficiency, maintain your currency, and you will embrace the safe and effective operation of those aircraft every day. And that's a belief that we have, and it's through you being here, you're reflecting that to the whole industry, and we appreciate that. So, few tips, train using scenarios, aeronautical decision-making models, and in addition to doing the maneuvers. One thing as an examiner, the FAA has asked us some time ago, they said, hey, we want you to use a plan of action. I'm very fortunate. I've been using scenarios for many, many years. I find it easier and have for many years found it easier to actually give a flight check or for certification, even a proficiency check under Part 135 for your air carrier folks. I walk in, and anyone, I know for a fact there's many people I've given check rides to watching this today. That when we walk into a room, I may write on the board a series of items and draw a box with some numbers in it, and here's the rule that applies to, and a portion of your check ride is just trying to figure out what that is. We find very often that, at least I do, that pilots know the rules. They know the procedures, the guidance. They understand a lot of the orders that may be out there, but they can't apply it. So when we go out on maybe a weather scenario for a primary or alternate airport, and they can recite the rule, but when you actually do the practical application between an approach plate and a forecast, when they put them together, they're lost. This is an issue. So the only way you can get to that highest level of learning of correlation is to work through scenarios. And that's something we want to do in training. Very often what we'll call that is facilitation. Training that facilitates the learning opportunity, meaning that I'm going to pull it out of you. It's in there. If you put forth the right effort, if you read the right books, if you get back in the knowledge base, then we're going to facilitate that, which is why an instructor will often want to know what you've been reading. What have you been studying? We are, as instructors, we're pretty familiar with a lot of the material. We should be familiar with the material that's out there on subject matter. Again, we've had to read the same books. We've been in your shoes. So being able to take that material that you learned and what you've read and apply that to a scenario, we then can make it very, very authentic to you. And that's an important part of your training, making it unique and special to that student that we're working with. So again, use scenarios, practice on aeronautical decision-making in addition to just doing flight maneuvers. That is a key component. The reason we're doing that is we're trying to work on situational awareness. Remember I told you, situational awareness has 3 components to it. Your perception. A situation occurs, and if you do not perceive it correctly, it's almost impossible to move forward with positive situational awareness, right? A high and effective level of situational awareness are the things that we're trying to work towards. With accurate perception, you're going to have comprehension. You must be taught, you must have knowledge, you must learn how to comprehend that information that's being brought in and then properly project it. Where are we going? What are we doing? And how am I going to engage a situation? And while you're doing that, you're using real-time risk assessments. One for maneuvers and things of that nature is the PAVE check. The PAVE assessment for pilots, the aircraft, the environment, and maybe any external pressures you may be dealing with. This is a fantastic little check for us for every situation we're going in, particularly a lot of our flight activities. You know, a pilot may be qualified and trained for whiteout and brownout conditions. So you know the pilot's good, you know the environment's good. You don't have any external pressures. This is a normal job. However, I have an aircraft that may not have a particle separator or some type of a barrier filter, which means the aircraft is inappropriate to go into that condition. This checklist is more about the totality of the circumstance than it is just any one element. And when we talk about a multifaceted approach, these are some of the key components to getting yourself trained back to a proficient standard. Situational awareness covers a whole lot of items. There's about 7 of them that are out there. And, we look at not only situational awareness itself, but what complements situational awareness. We have communication. We have decision-making items that we have to look at, our workload, managing it, our stress, things of that nature, right? Are we leaders in the cockpit? Are we leaders in amongst our group, our company? The leadership aspect of being a positive leader, not a manager, just a leader, right? A functional pilot in command. And that allows the last piece, and that's that cohesiveness, that synergy. When you do everything correctly, it all flows smoothly, and we're operating in a very safe environment. These are key components to everything we do. So practice situational awareness and utilize the PAVE checklist while you're out there operating these aircraft. It's a critical component. Checklist. Please use checklist. Whether it's an automated checklist, whether it's a printed checklist, whether it's a command and response or a flow going back to, a segment of the checklist, use a checklist. Evaluators, if you are a check pilot, if you're an instructor pilot, if you test it, if you check it, they will train it. Don't get in an aircraft with somebody and allow them to work their flow, because that's just what we do. If you hold them to the standard and you will train and check them, you will have a pilot that will keep doing these positive skill sets when you go forward. If you do not test it, if you do not check it, it's going to be an escape. So again, if you test it, they will train it. It's a good rule of thumb. Use those checklists. Increasing margins of safety while reintegrating. We talked about this, performance on the aircraft. Enhance the performance. Reduce your fuel, maybe for certain altitudes. Maybe fly a little shorter distance. Make sure you're rested. Make sure when you're training, come in prepared so that you get the best out of a training event so that your proficiency reaches its highest level. That is a key component to this whole plan. That is a key component to the whole plan. And as I said earlier, adjustment, personal minimums. Adjust yourself. Something you may have been able to do very, very effectively 6 months ago. Today, you might be a little slow doing that, right? And you need to get yourself back to that same scale and that same level. And it's very, very, very possible to get there. It's just you have to work yourself through it. Do not assume just because you feel proficient that you are. Proficiency comes with an evaluation. Proficiency comes with demonstration. Go out and demonstrate it to somebody, fly with somebody, make sure that you meet that proficiency metric. And that's the only way you can verify that you truly are a proficient pilot at that time. Lastly, as I come into the end here, there's a lot of organizations out there. We, again, with Helicopter Association at HAI, the FAA, other in the fixed wing side of the house, with AOPA, there's lots of them. This is just a few that I wanted to put on the display. Civil Air Patrol, things that you can participate in. Again, we have the FAA Wings program. A little hard with COVID, but there are things you can go out to either live or virtually. Get your head in the game and make sure you are mentors to someone else. Provide support and resources for other folks to be able to become proficient, maintain their proficiency, and help them along. Especially if you got somebody who wants to fly with you sometime, if they ask you to go along and you're the proficient person, help mentor their proficiency, because at the end, the safety of the overall industry affects us all, affects every single one of us. So in closing, I just want you to say there's, the basic 7 rules of life, as they say, let it go. It's been a hard time, folks. We're all in this together. Ignore all the stuff you see going on negative. If you got something around the world, different things, just, give it time. Give it time. This is going to pass. We'll all be fine. All right. Once we get through it, put forth the special efforts. You'll be fine. Don't compare yourself to another organization or another person. Compare yourself to the most proficient pilot based on the standards that you need to be at. Keep it to that level, and that's going to keep you safe. Stay calm. It's on you. You're there. You're that person. You can do this. And at the end of the day, even though the mask is a little hard to deal with, smile. Your eyes will show you're smiling, and that's the key. So thank you very, very much to all of you for allowing me to participate. I greatly appreciate it. And I'll turn it back over to you folks.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for the information. Things that ring dear to me is the flight test world and flying pilots all the time in helicopters. The proficiency versus currency aspect. Good explanation about that. Proficiency plan. Good words to heed. Good idea to incorporate during this downtime right now. I do have a number of questions that have come up for you.
Fantastic.
So, let's see, the first one, similar to hand-eye coordination getting rusty due to, I guess, lack of flying proficiency. Do you feel, or is your opinion, that decision-making can also be affected by a lack of proficiency?
Yeah, I think maybe that was an earlier question. Absolutely. So we discussed that. Decision-making, the longer we don't fly, the less we're making those decisions. So we will, it's like the old adage of getting cobwebs, right? It's without use, that theory of disuse means we don't use some of those skill sets. So to answer the question, absolutely. Without flying, the decision-making process may get flawed.
And build on to that question, another one, what do you see as the first skill area to deteriorate from the lack of flying?
Well, whether you fly or not, I think we all agree that, one of the things that we'll see is the skill set deteriorating is instrument skills. Instrument skill sets are definitely, that is a perishable skill. The next thing we see that comes down is night. So, your instrument world, the night flying, that's another thing. And then, anything that requires the pilot's ability to demonstrate just, maybe a loss of visual cues, things of that nature, or something that requires high tasking on the pilot. Those things are the first things that go. However, no matter what you think is gone, no matter your perception, you always want to start at the basics to be able to ramp back up to that proficiency skill set.
There we go. Let's see. Good explanation. Let's see, next one. What is the major difference in mindset you see between civilian pilots versus military pilots in the helicopter environment?
Well, that's a loaded question. I would tell you that that's not one that I think really has a defined answer. Every pilot, regardless of your base training, is going to be unique to their skill sets. It's a fact that military pilots may have been trained differently than a non-military pilot, but their ability to blend into the national airspace system and fly safely is equivalent on both sides. Very often, it's not so much just the skill sets; it's the processes to get to the end result that might be a little different. So I really don't think there's a difference. It's just unique to the aviator.
A lot of different environments. Well, missions, I'll say. Aspect, but same environments we run into. Let's see, next question. You mentioned the deviations, waivers, exemptions that may be out there. Do you know if they are issued universally, or do individual operators have to request them?
Both. There are some things that, again, through SBAR 118-2 that's there now, that is a universal process where you can go to the computer, get that information. As it relates to by operator, the communication with your principal inspectors will allow you to have certain things that may be unique to that operator that fall within their ability, the orders, the guidance, and the regulations. So a little of both.
Missed my mute button again, sorry. So let's see, got a couple more here for you. Are there training methods such as simulation which may help to enhance the individual situational awareness capabilities?
Absolutely, and that goes through scenarios. Again, simulation is a wonderful mechanism for us to go through procedural aspects of flight. And again, checklists, those things that we want to enhance that are known to positively affect safety. And then, the basic skill sets, scanning, things of that nature. Also, when you get in the actual aircraft and training there, those same scenarios are very, very beneficial. So scenarios are a great way to affect the aeronautical decision-making process of a pilot in training.
There you go. Okay. And another question. Did you have to contend with the pandemic firsthand? If you did, how'd you do it? Or how would you recommend others handle it?
Well, absolutely. I think all of us have dealt with it firsthand. It doesn't matter whether you've contracted or you have just lived your life on a day-to-day basis. We've all been dealing with it in our own way. As an operator, we have, of course, customers. So we have honored a lot of the requests of COVID safety and security between our offices and our aircraft, and cleanly, and the cleanliness of that. Mask as it relates to potential, flying with somebody. That's something there. And also we do a lot, probably half of the work that we do is off-site. So if I'm traveling from coast to coast, we're right on those airlines with them and working through those airports and hotels. So I think we've all been going through it. But as I said, we're all in this together. And as we move forward, the industry will recover. And, the key to what we're doing is that we recover safely. And that's the goal behind not only this discussion, but this entire seminar.
Thanks, Randy. All good insights. And that's actually all. That's all the questions I actually received this time. We actually ended a little early here, but thank you for joining us, Randy. Once again, very appreciative of coming out and but virtually presenting.
Well, thank you.
Conference center made it easier, but I know doing it virtually, we are reaching out a lot more attendees than we did in person. So I'm sure everybody here appreciates everything you presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, and everyone stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. It's ready. Okay. And we're just about the time. So we're actually going to move on to the next presenter. I would like to introduce George Castillo. He's the manager of the Rotorcraft Standards branch here in Fort Worth. My former boss too, but his organization is responsible for airworthiness standards and policies pertaining to Part 27 and Part 29, the normal and transport category of rotorcraft. He's going to be discussing a rotorcraft safety initiatives. So George, I will hand over the floor to you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to do a audio check here. Make sure you can hear me.
Hear you loud and clear. It looks good.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you, everybody, for being here. As Stephen mentioned, George Castillo, and for our Spanish-speaking members, Jorge Castillo. So today, I plan to spend some time with you to share a concept that I feel is long overdue for our industry, a concept that has a potential to finally change the track record that we have with respect to rotorcraft fatalities. But before I do that, I'll give you a brief overview of the life cycle of an aircraft and the role that the FAA has throughout this life cycle. I'm going to also spend some time speaking on rotorcraft occupant protection. That is an area that's received a lot of focus and attention within the FAA, industry, and Congress. And then I'll conclude it with the rotorcraft safety concept that I'm looking to share with you. So when we look at the life cycle of a rotorcraft or an aircraft in general, our primary responsibility in the FAA is to establish the safety standards or the regulations and the policy. The standards and policy that will be used during the design and development of aircraft. Those standards must be complied before we issue the approval via a type certificate. The FAA also establishes standards to ensure that the production approval holders are manufacturing these products under a quality control system. We have standards to ensure that the individuals that will be working on these products, such as mechanics and the pilots that will be flying these machines, satisfy the expectations from the safety standards that we put in place. We have standards for the operators before they get the operational approval for utilizing these products. And then we have standards to make sure that the aircraft are maintained in a manner that will keep them airworthy throughout their life. Our job doesn't end there. We continue to monitor these products throughout their service life and take any necessary action to address any immediate safety concerns. My focus in this presentation is going to be on the product itself, the rotorcraft, the things that we do to ensure that that rotorcraft is safe for operation. The standards that we will be discussing are parts 27 and 29, part 27 for normal category and part 29 for transport category. And I remind everybody that these are minimum safety standards. We certify rotorcraft to parts 27 and 29 by issuance of a type certificate. And then we continue to monitor these products. When there's an unsafe condition, we may issue mandatory corrective actions such as an airworthiness directive, or when it doesn't rise to that level, we may share safety information through a safety SAIB, a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin. Excuse me. In the area of standards and policy, there are two major policies that we issue over the last 5 to 7 years. The first one is what we refer to as NORCI. NORCI was a policy that was issued to try to make non-required equipment that has a potential to improve safety, but not required by certification regulations or operational regulations, with the hope that the installation of this equipment will be more affordable. However, we did not receive the traction that we were hoping with NORCI. But NORCI was actually a stepping stone to a much broader and comprehensive policy. And that's our safety continuum policy statement for parts 27. That policy statement was the first time that we broke part 27 rotorcraft into 4 classes. The purpose of doing that is to accommodate the large spectrum in variations of normal category rotorcraft. Everything from a 2-seater, single reciprocating engine, all the way to a twin turbine, high-performing 9-passenger aircraft. By doing this, it allowed us to right-size the level of certitude depending on the class, therefore enabling more affordable equipment and technology and innovation into these products. As a result of this policy statement, we had 2 recent approvals for the lower category rotorcraft, single-engine rotorcraft, that achieved IFR approval. Typically, over the last several decades, the only IFR approvals that we were issuing, because that's all the applicants were requesting, was for the twin engine classes. Just like we issue policy to help reduce the number of rotorcraft accidents, we have had some success in reducing rotorcraft accidents. However, that success did not materialize when it came up to rotorcraft fatalities. Our accident rate for rotorcraft fatalities has been stagnant over the last 15 years. This is something that we've been thinking a lot for a long time, and we must break this trend. So around 2013, our office, in coordination with the Civil Aerospace Medical Institute, conducted a rotorcraft fatal accident study. We studied 5 years worth of fatal accidents. In that study, we observed that 36% of fatal rotorcraft accidents involve a post-crash fire. Of those accidents, 23% of the events of post-crash fire contributed to the fatal outcome. However, in 77% of the events, blunt force trauma was the contributing factor for the fatal outcome. We also were quite surprised that the standards to address fatalities due to post-crash fires and fatalities due to blunt force trauma have been in existence for several decades. However, when we looked at the US fleet, the percentage of rotorcraft in the US fleet that met those standards was extremely low, 10 or 15%. And I'll talk about why that's the case. In our study, we also observed that we had over 1,300 fatalities on rotorcraft that were not equipped with the crash-resistant seats and structures that are intended to prevent and minimize blunt force trauma injuries and fatalities. As a result of that study, we were able to initiate an aviation rulemaking advisory committee that was tasked with providing recommendations to the FAA on improving our CRFS and CRSS standards. Well, that committee was undertaking that task. We issued for the first time a special awareness information bulletin in 2017. This bulletin was intended to raise awareness and educate on the importance of crash-resistant fuel systems. The SAIB also provided for the first time a listing of rotorcraft models that comply with those standards. Shortly after the ARAC working group completed their report, Congress in the US issued under the FAA 2018 Reauthorization Act a mandate that any rotorcraft manufacturer as of April 5th, 2020 or after must comply with the crashworthy fuel system requirements. We revised our SAIB to add a listing of rotorcraft models that comply with the congressional mandate. We kept the original listing of rotorcraft that comply with all the crashworthy fuel system requirements. To complement the SAIB on crash-resistant fuel systems, we issue a second SAIB to now raise the awareness and identify the importance of having crash-resistant seats and structures. That SAIB also included a listing of rotorcraft models that meet those standards. As far as the FAA mandate for crashworthy fuel systems, that mandate applied to newly manufactured rotorcraft. And the mandate pretty much adopted the recommendations of the ARAC Rotorcraft Occupant Protection Working Group. So the question to us, is this enough to take rotorcraft safety to the next level? To answer that question, let's look at the US rotorcraft fleet landscape. We have an aging fleet in the US. 50% of the US rotorcraft are over 20 years, 33% are over 30 years. The turnover rate for new rotorcraft replacing older in the US fleet is extremely low, 1 to 2% per year. To complicate matters, just because a rotorcraft is produced now does not mean that it meets the latest safety standards. Within our system, by law, an applicant is only required to meet the safety standards at time when they apply for an FAA type certificate. So that type certificate was issued 30 years ago. Then the standards that that model met are 30 years old, and that's our certification basis. That applicant is allowed by law to produce that aircraft indefinitely. There's a lot of people in this industry that were not aware of that system that we have in place. And this became apparent about 4 or 5 years ago when we were briefing this subject in one of these forums. So what options do we have to elevate the safety level for rotorcraft? There's 3 options. The FAA rulemaking process, which has been in place since the FAA was established. That process is a good process. However, it does not have the capability to keep up with the demands for rulemaking within the agency. We also have US congressional mandates, such as the 2018 mandate for crash-resistant fuel systems. However, we may not always get the optimal solution to a given problem. Third one is voluntary compliance, and that's the one I want to focus on, because our standards are minimum safety standards. As I mentioned before, industry can always exceed those standards. So what can we do to encourage more voluntary compliance in pursuit of higher levels of safety for rotorcraft? There's some challenges with just retrofitting older models to the new standards. The design modifications to the older models can be rather complex, which can become very costly. There's competing interests between performance and safety. Adding more equipage increases weight, reduces payload. Owners and operators' lack of understanding of the regulations and our system for certification and not being able to ascertain what safety features exist or don't exist in a given model adds to this challenge, because the consumer may not be willing to pay for safety that they don't understand. So we continue to deal with this challenge and we've been dealing with this challenge since I've been working for this agency, going on 25 years. However, a fatality safety record demands that we take bold and innovative steps to finally make a significant change in our track record. I strongly believe that the key to achieving that goal is the establishment of a Rotorcraft safety rating concept. This is something that we have discussed within our agency since I started working for this agency. I vividly recall talking about this 3 times in my career with the FAA. 20 years ago, we brought this subject up. That conversation lasted maybe a few minutes and we moved on. 10 years ago, the same conversation. For whatever reason, the time wasn't right at that time. However, the 3rd time that we discussed this was right after the Rotorcraft study on Rotorcraft fatalities. At that time, we had a much more meaningful internal discussion. It was at that time that we decided this is the answer that we've been seeking for a long time. A Rotorcraft safety rating concept that is built on the principles of informing and educating the consumer to increase awareness of the safety features that can be designed and installed on these products. A Rotorcraft safety rating concept that's built on the principle of promoting voluntary compliance to achieve higher levels of safety with the intended outcome of reducing Rotorcraft accidents and fatalities. There's many benefits to this concept and idea. It creates a mechanism to highlight safety features of Rotorcraft. Throughout the last 3 days, I've heard some of you mention instances where you exceeded the minimum safety standards. Through a concept such as this, you're able to promote and highlight those safety features for your products. It creates a market-driven approach to safety where the consumer now demands safety because they now understand it. It can help improve the public's confidence on Rotorcraft safety, and we allow performance and safety to coexist as opposed to perceiving them as being competing interests. The idea did not just get discussed within the FAA. 3 to 4 years ago, we started discussion outside the FAA. We had discussions with our industry associations at various venues. The ARAC, Rotorcraft Occupant Protection Working Group report that we received in 2018 has a recommendation to implement such a concept. About 2 years ago, in a meeting here in Fort Worth, Texas, United States, we were meeting with EASA, our counterparts in EASA. We shared with them this idea. We shared with them our plans to seriously start brainstorming and pursuing this concept. I was glad to hear about a year ago, EASA announced at their VTOL Rotorcraft Symposium that they too are planning to explore this concept. Industry groups associated with the International Helicopter Safety Foundation have discussed the development of such a concept. And the concept is not new. The automotive industry has already chartered this territory. They've had a 5-star rating program since 1993. That program has resulted in creating a consumer that is very well informed on safety features of automobiles. It has created a consumer that demands safety. That program has been improved and revamped over the years, and they've had great success in achieving levels of safety that are unheard of in aviation. Our office did not just discuss such a concept. We've done a lot of legwork. We've been working on such a concept for over a year. And that work started with the SAIBs that I discussed earlier, the 2 SAIBs, the one for CRFS and CRSS. Those 2 SAIBs pretty much were testing the waters of this type of concept because each one of those SAIBs was providing information, providing an education source to understanding our regulations to provide the consumer an appreciation for the importance of these safety features. When we issued the first SAIB in 2017, we weren't sure what kind of reaction we would get from the industry and from the public. The first call we received was from an OEM, was asking why isn't their model on the list? After further discussions, it transitioned into when can we get on that list? The simple answer to that is once you modify your design to comply with these requirements. That ACIB resulted in industry OEMs voluntarily starting to modify some of their new production models, including getting approval for kits to retrofit some of the existing fleet. All these were voluntary measures, stem from the simple fact that we provided safety information to the consumer, where the consumer was now equipped with safety knowledge, so they will be more willing to pay for these features. Not only did we continue to explore this concept, we actually have done some legwork in creating some possible categories for a rotorcraft safety rating concept. The 6 categories here are intended to address the prevention of accidents, but at the same time, increasing the chances of survival should there be a survivable accident. We have data to try to establish 4-star levels of rating within each one of these categories. For the top 3 categories, we've got data from the industry through ARAC reports. The Rotorcraft Occupant Protection Working Group ARAC report provided recommendations for the top 2. There's also an ARAC report for bird strike protection for Rotorcraft. In those reports, there's some very useful information that can be used to come up with 4-star levels of safety within those categories. We've also done some brainstorming to develop similar categories for the bottom 3. This is an example of a Rotorcraft safety rating concept that could be used as a baseline. So why am I here? I'm here to challenge this industry to take this idea, which is long overdue within our industry. Take it, explore it, revise it, and run with it. Through education and awareness, we strongly believe that safety can sell, which is a win-win for all of us. We can finally achieve unprecedented levels of safety improvements in these products. So the next step, we will be reaching out to the various Rotorcraft associations and share this and additional work that we've completed within our organization. Because an informed consumer will not only expect safety features to be designed into their products, they will demand it, which creates a market that drives safety. This is good for business, it is good for safety. It'll finally set us on a path that will allow us to achieve the safety gains that we've been striving for the last 30 years or so. So in closing, this industry is in a position to do something that's unprecedented in aviation. It's in a position to take a lead in implementing a concept that has already been proven to be very successful in the automotive industry. This concept can also be expanded to other segments of aviation transportation. Some of you are involved in an urban air mobility market, and that market is looking to attract the segment of the flying public that not only expects but demands the highest level of safety. So one way to meet the consumer demands for safety is through a safety rating concept. So I like to hope, and I hope that 1 year from now, when we're having this session or another forum, it will be you, the industry, briefing to the FAA and the industry of a Rotorcraft safety rating concept that you've come up with and have implemented or are very close to implementing. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Very interesting and novel approach to improving rotorcraft safety through working with industry and having industry set standards too. Well, the non-regulatory standards, market-driven per se. I do have actually a number of questions have come in related to this topic of yours. And the first one I think is a comment, but maybe a question there too, if you see one. The comment is, during the speech by the administrator, he mentioned that our industry, should be looking into retrofitting rotorcraft with occupant protection provisions. If they're there, you have kits, we should be pushing each other to get those in there. Is there anything you want to elaborate on this comment?
Yes, and as I mentioned, rulemaking is a avenue that we have to mandate. There's challenges with rulemaking. There's a lot of backlog of regulations within the agency. our agency has a capacity to accommodate about 30 rules per year. The backlog of regulations ranges in the 100 rules. We in Rotorcraft have to compete with Part 25, Part 23, rulemaking for operations, rulemaking for air track transportation, etc. That is an option. However, that option is not going to get us where we want to be quicker. So that's why what we're doing is trying to promote voluntary compliance. And the SAIBs that I mentioned before have already achieved a level of success in that arena. OEMs, as I mentioned, have already started working towards developing kits to allow the retrofit of the existing fleet. That action has been done without any mandatory requirements from the FAA.
Thanks, George. And also related to the first day comment, this seems to be related to a concept Amanda Repsher brought up about three-legged stool, the regulatory, the carrot, and the demand. Regulatory side, we have the minimum standards, and through the product rules, the newly manufactured didn't have to make the changes to meet the, I guess, the regs on that date it was manufactured. But the carrot, it sounds like the safety rating concept is providing the carrot out there and also playing into demand. Is there anything you can expand on that concept?
Yes, absolutely. That's a good question. I recall having different conversations, similar subject, with different stakeholders. OEMs have come and said, we can build all this, we can design all these features into our products. But when we deliver products to our consumers, the consumers seem to be more, what's the word? They care more about, do I have the latest avionics? Do I have the latest software, the latest displays? And I believe the reason for that is because there's an assumption that safety is already been designed, highest level safeties have been designed into all these models. And them not understanding what exactly they're getting for their money's worth from a safety standpoint, I think is a lack of incentive for the consumer to be asking more questions about safety, not so much about performance and features. And I also recall a company that was coming to us a couple of years ago and said, we have a safety solution for this industry. We took the IHST accident data, we looked at the top contributing factors, and we saw an opportunity by which technology can help. At one of the HAI Heli Expo events, this company went around the floor and talked to various potential customers. Every customer agreed that their idea is what the industry needs. However, every potential customer they spoke to said, but I don't need it, my competitor needs it. So we haven't had a platform in place to allow us, in combination with industry, to promote safety features so that safety can sell. And that's what the Rotorcraft safety rating concept is intended to do, provide that carrot that's been lacking within our industry.
Thanks, George. Also related to one of the, I believe it's Karen Mahaney's actually working toward it. The question was about, has the FAA leveraged Congress to initiate incentives such as tax breaks for owners and operators that step up to implement the safety options? I believe, if I remember the first day, Karen Mahaney talked about that's one thing she's been working with and plans as the new Congress gets into session to start pushing for Congress to look into offering tax incentives for the owners and operators to financially help them adopt these new safety measures or kits to improve safety. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, we the FAA cannot lobby Congress. So, our role is to apply and implement the law that's entrusted on us via the safety regulations. So those are all viable measures. However, they would need to be initiated and driven through external entities.
Thanks. And let's see, next question I have. If the FAA can mandate aircraft, and you might have already covered this, but if the FAA can mandate aircraft to be equipped with certain avionics systems, and I assume they're talking about ADSB, after a certain date, why can't fuel systems and seat and structure requirements be mandated and, to be adopted within a certain time frame?
Yes, we could do that. We have a rule, a retroactive rule in parts 27 and 29. That's 27.2 and 29.2. However, I did mention that to go through the FAA rulemaking process, we have to get on the priority list within the FAA. And there's some very stringent requirements that any government agency that's proposing any mandatory regulations. We have to provide a cost-benefit analysis, and there's certain criteria that we must address that's provided to us. There's also the public input at time, and we have to go through a very lengthy process to finally issue a mandatory regulation that everybody has to comply with. That is always on the table. We do have some proposals internal, but as I mentioned before, voluntary compliance is a vehicle that's going to get us to the end result much quicker than relying on the FAA rulemaking process because of all the other competing interests within the FAA.
Thanks. And the let's see, next question I have you thought of including the insurance industry in the quest for safety and improvements?
Yes, absolutely. When we talked 15 years ago, when we were discussing other concepts, we actually had the insurance industry working. And I believe the program back then was the tour operators, TOPS program. Industry was a partner in those discussions. And I recall having great success in coming up with a concept. However, when that concept was completed, the insurance industry said, that's great. Now come back to us and talk to us when you've got data showing that you have achieved the safety gains that you're hoping to achieve. In this case, it is imperative that we get the industry involved again, you as the industry, when you take this concept and start exploring it. Because that's industry rates is a challenge within insurance rates, within our industry. And I sincerely believe that this will provide a tangible approach that the industry can rely on, because it is already an approach that's used in the automotive industry. And it's been very successful in that industry. So I see no reasons why the aviation insurance entities would not find this concept appealing to reduce insurance rates.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Trying to put in words here. How did your office come up with the 6 categories for the concept? No, you mentioned 3 of them, really pushing for on the occupant protection focus on 3 of them. The second 3, my understanding, are that they are accident prevention focused. Any elaboration on how you came up with the 6 and going forward 3? And
yes, we put together a team of great minds within our office, including individuals that were participating in the U.S. Helicopter Safety Foundation that have been very involved in the accident studies that they've done. And we started brainstorming some possible categories. As I mentioned before, we needed to attack both the ways to reduce the accident itself, but at the same time be realists and do things to increase the chances of surviving should there be a survivable accident. So those 6 categories is our best attempt to start something. It doesn't mean that those are the 6 only categories, but we wanted to start this effort so that we can then pass something that the industry can work from. But there's a lot more data that we have internally that we plan to share with the industry on how we came up with the 6 categories.
Thanks, George. And have one time, I believe, for one final question here. Question is, can you tell us more about improvements intended to reduce loss of control?
All those 6 categories, and loss of control was one of those. The policies that we talked about, the safety condition policy statement, and other initiatives that we have internal are intended to try to reduce the regulatory burden and streamline the certification process so that we can accommodate innovation to help us in address areas such as loss of control. So we are doing our part to make sure that our processes and our certification approach is conducive to allowing the industry to come up with viable solutions and not get in the way of getting those solutions into the fleet.
Well, thank you, George. A lot of great information. And like I said earlier, it's a very different approach on the FAA side to try to figure out how to improve the, I guess, safety of designs out there right now. Push forward, make it get industry's help, and hopefully we get the industry's groups and to help us out and to actually carry on what you started in your office. A very good concept. And I do appreciate you taking time to speak to us today about this concept. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay. Our final presentation is an update on accident investigation and prevention offered by Pat Hempen, who is the director of FAA's National Accident Investigation GO Team. His career experience includes serving as a special agent in the U.S. State Department's Counterterrorism Branch, as a federal air marshal, an FAA inspector pilot, and as an FAA international manager. Pat also has airline transport pilot ratings on the Boeing 707, the 737, the 747, the 747-400, the 777, the DC-9, and the C-123 aircraft. Say that in one breath. It's a lot, Pat. He is a certified flight instructor and owns ratings as a dispatcher, control tower operator, flight engineer, parachute rigger, and a helicopter commercial and instrument pilot. Hey, Pat, thank you for joining us today, and I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Steve. All that to say, I just can't hold a job. Let me screen share real quick here. Hang on. Let's see. There we go. So anyway, hi everybody. Yeah, I'm Pat Hempen. Thank you so much, Steve. This has been an incredible event. I'm in awe. So really good job. Basically, anything I say, I think we'll just coalesce some of it. And being a bureaucrat, I got, like I'm sure y'all have, I've been called away several times. So some of this maybe a little bit of repeat. But basically, I'm the director of accident investigation at FAA headquarters. And we're like the GO team for major events, but we're also the group that puts eyes on every single accident and incident by U.S. registered aircraft and anything in the national airspace. So every morning we get up and we sort through every event, and then we brief the decision makers on our 10th floor, which is at FAA headquarters. So, and then we take appropriate action. And we usually will have what we call a roundup every morning, where we all sit and decide, and we're briefing the other FAA lines of business. So the way I measure success when I go flying is if I don't make the next morning report. So that's how I do it. So the Office of Accident Investigation is just one part of the whole accident investigation world. Of course, there's all the flight standards inspectors. NTSB does their incredible job, and mainly you operators out there, y'all participate in with great noble service, and the manufacturers. And it's as we can all attest, it's a very, very interesting job. It's fascinating, but of course it's always very tragic. And so I always say I meet the very, very best people under the very, very worst circumstances. So, you know, you do this job and it's not difficult to have a lot of passion. So anyway, you know, we're in this job because we want to make a difference, bottom line. So real quickly, I'll just go over the exact, you know, why we do what we do. So of course, you know, the FAA has the statute authority, 49 USC for aviation safety. And then the 113, that includes investigations. And then as you see in 701, we want to reduce and eliminate accidents and all this. So when the FAA investigates, you know, as we know, NTSB, their role is probable cause. Our role is continual operational safety. So in that, you always hear about, and this may have been covered already, so I apologize, but it's the 9 areas of responsibility. So that's always going to be the same focus when we arrive to a crash scene. You know, were FAA facilities involved, non-FAA facilities, like a non-federal control tower or something, airworthiness of the aircraft, FAR adequacy, or missed airmen, FAR adequacy, airport certification, security, and the FAA still does some security items, even with TSA, like interference with flight crew and smoking in lab and protection of the flight deck. That's still FAA domain. Hazardous materials, airman medical qualification and violations. So in that, the standard document is the 8020.11d. That's what guides everything we do. It's a public document, so we're actually rewriting it right now, or updating it, I should say. So if anyone, anybody has things that they think could improve it or something we think we should address differently, very open to that. And even an FAA inspector, you know, their guidance is the order 8900.1, but what that will always do is guide them to the 8020.11. So this is the source document that we use for our investigations. And again, what is the FAA's role? Well, of course, our role is to ensure safety. And again, NTSB, they're doing a very great job of finding probable cause, and by statute, we're part of the investigation, but we're there for the cost mission. Of course, we're aiding the NTSB in that probable cause finding. And so I often say the NTSB is sort of the why, we're the what. They find out why it happened, we find out what happened. And of course, when you do that, you sort of get the same conclusions. But anyway, again, it's the 9 areas of responsibility, and then the fruition of all this is to make corrective action. So again, we look at the facts, conditions, circumstances, make sure they're recorded and evaluated, make sure the FAA is enforced, and of course the FAA does that through surveillance. And when NTSB is not on the scene, of course, we'll provide data, and of course my mantra is always coordinate, coordinate, coordinate. And you know, any kind of work with CAMI, the autopsies or anything else, we coordinate with them. When you have the FAA investigator in charge when they're on scene, of course, they're the liaison officer, we say, for the FAA. They're working with the NTSB, or if it's a military investigation or public use, whatever. The FAA rep there is the IIC, and they of course provide information, but they have to supervise all the FAA personnel that are there. So when you have people from other lines of business and other people aiding the investigation, they're the ones sort of responsible for all the activities. And if we need to, we request a flight inspection if necessary from a FAA flight check aircraft. We prepare the FAA accident form, the -23, and make safety recommendations if needed. And of course, if it's a field inspector, they can always request assistance from us, AVP 100. As you know, there's about 4,700 employees or 47,000 employees in the FAA. 3,600 of them are flight standards inspectors and 500 aircraft cert engineers, area facilities, aerospace, usual group. So you got 79 flight standards offices and 18 CMOs, then the 5 aircraft evaluation groups, and you got 4 international offices. And this is short, it shows where they're all scattered all over the United States. The reds are the FSDOs, flight standards offices, and of course, Alaska, Hawaii. We have 4 international offices. And as I'm sure y'all aware, we have FAA reps in many of the major embassies throughout the world. And again, the physio inspector, they will do the bulk of the helicopter accidents. Of course, we do the majors. So like our team was there for the Calabasas and other things that may have a lot of high media profile or those kinds of things. Then we'll actually launch someone from our office. But of all the flight standards inspectors are all trained. The Transportation Safety Institute, they all get on job training. And of course, you know, they have many backgrounds when they're there. They could be pilots, mechanics, cabin safety, real varied backgrounds. So the thing we always try to remind folks is, if we're doing our cost mission, when we're doing accident investigation, it's just a parallel investigation. If it ever does come to enforcement, then that would be a separate investigation, and hopefully by separate people. And the information gained from the safety investigation would not be used by the enforcement investigation. They'll have to get their own information from their own investigation. So the main focus is it's separate. Just to show you how it's broken down. So of course, you know, there's the air traffic and airports, but the world y'all probably deal with the most is AVS, and which Ali Barami is the associate administrator, and Jody Baker is the acting deputy right now. You have medicine with Dr. Wyrick. Dr. Berry just retired, so Dr. Wyrick's acting. Flight standards, executive director Rick Domingo. CERT, aircraft certification is Earl Lawrence. We have drones is Jay Merkel, and then our office executive director Steve Gottlieb. And the way it breaks down is AVP 100. We're the like I say, we're the go team. We're the policy makers for accident investigation. AVP 200, I'll talk about them. They do a lot of the, they work with the, a lot of the initiatives for voluntary initiatives to enhance safety, and they do a lot of the statistical analysis kind of items. AVP 300 is the SMS policy overseers, and then 400 is the, they do the recommendations. We get recommendations not only from NTSB, but from international FAA inspectors. So anyway, it just shows our org chart. Again, we do about 1,200 accidents or collect data, or work them a year, 200,000 incidents. Process right now at least 300 NTSB requests, and we deploy investigators for significant events as needed. And that's the Merry Happy Band there. Just a quick, Eric is a PMI that came up to the ranks of flight standards. Airworthiness Todd was a Hangar 6, F-16 airline pilot. Dave Keenan is aerospace engineer. Dr. Sabrina Woods is a human factor specialist. Ann's one that processes all this great information. Patrick Lesh was airline pilot and ops inspector, came up to the ranks. And then, of course, we know the eminent Matt Rigsby that works there out with you folks out there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Helicopter guru of great renown. And then we have Matt Kabak, who's air traffic control specialist. So that just sort of gives you an idea. So the way it usually works is, you know, they have duty rotations. Boom, you have the incident. You're out on vacation with non-refundable tickets to a beautiful hotel. So off you go. And that's the world we live in, and I'm sure y'all live in the same way. So immediately we assemble information and then out the door. Just want y'all to know we were wearing masks long before COVID. So we were the vanguards there. So, you know, and just like what Jorge was talking about, all the initiatives that the Rotorcraft director and everyone puts out is, you know, we go to the crash site. This is just an example of a tragic event where it was all fatal out there in Arkansas. When just sudden loss of track on the radar, and wreckage, of course, had bird remains. So then, you know, the operator, of course, says this is something we have to change our planning for our routes. We look at the NTSB previous recommendations, bird strikes, and of course, like Jorge saying, they set up a lot of their committees and start doing good work. And, you know, that's how we found out it was just the duck hunting capital of the world, where that aircraft just happened to be. And again, we've already talked about like the doors off operations and the tragic accident up in New York. Well, then what, you know, we'll be involved with all the safety implementations, the FAA orders, the prohibition of open doors and the supplemental restraints, and notices to inspectors on the surveillance. And then we go to legal and we get a legal interp, you know, what's aerial photography versus air tour, and, you know, look at the skid floats and, you know, is an airworthiness directive needed, those kinds of things. And again, that safety action team that Jorge was talking about. So, you know, these are just all the different things we'll look at. We'll look at design, maintenance, procedures, training, qualifications, etc. The way we make the changes is through SAFOs, infos, advisory circulars. Do we change our standards? Do we change our guidance? Do we look at regulations, airworthiness directives, what have you? And again, when we respond, we usually jump on the Hangar 6 plane, show up, and then we start saying what FAA equities are we going to need to bring with us? Flight standards, air, medical, air traffic, hazmat, or even commercial space. And again, our go team is usually on major events. So people often talk about the command center. They said, I talked to the command center. So we always have to pin down to make sure we know which one. The Washington Operations Center is the operations center on the 10th floor of the FAA, and that's sort of the decision-making focus information gatherer. Underneath them falls the ROCs, and the ROCs are usually the ones that take the first initial calls and do the first initial coordination to get people on scene to the accident. But also you have and they fall under the umbrella of the WAC, but also you have the FAA Command Center, and they're the ones that do all the air traffic flow for the national airspace. Well, that was actually the unit or the operation that put the aircraft on the ground during 9/11. So it's a very huge facility out there in Vent Hill, Virginia. And of course, TSA has the TSOC, it's the Big Giant Operations Center out in Herndon, Virginia. And Customs has the Air Marine Operations Center in California. The DA has the EPIC, El Paso Intelligence Center. And of course, you got the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, Coast Guard, NORAD, et cetera. The bottom line is the WAC is what they receive all that information, they coalesce it, and they send out the text. They're the ones that make the 2 a.m. phone calls, and those are the people we really rely on. And you see here is their contact information, and you see here's the ROC contact information for each region out there. And so the fog of war, what the walk does, once they send the page out, they've sort of done their duty. And then it's sort of up to us to say what appropriate actions are going to be required. A lot of the actions are already in place, but we sort of oversee to make sure that is indeed occurring. So I just use this. We had this page out several days ago. So, you know, I had the Airbus 50 crash. It used the word crash. Well, when they send these reports out, it could mean an auto rotation or it could mean an actual hull loss. So we have to determine, and then we have to figure out what the injuries really are versus what's reported. So again, it's the fog of war. We have to look at, all this does is just tell us what occurred, that something did occur, and then we have to actually find out what. And when the first forms that are filled out, some of y'all may see these sometime. These are we call these the 8020-9. Usually they're filled out by air traffic. Sometimes law enforcement have these forms, what have you. But this is how the first initial notification goes to the walk of who, what, when, where, whether, who's responded, etc. And they sometimes still use fax machines. Many of these older places, or they'll of course scan it and email it. This is a blurry slide. I apologize. I just wanted to show this real quick that the action then cycle is always a continuum. You know, we get notified, you grab the data as you go out the door, you do the on-scene management, you do your investigation analysis, do findings. Meanwhile, reporting, you're always reporting it every step of the way. You have a final report closeout, and then voila, you get more information. So you start the process all over. So we really never say case closed on an accident investigation. We're always, we'll always respond to new information as it comes across. So y'all have had many great presentations on trend analysis and just great reviews on where we're at right now as an industry. I can only tell you that, so I'm going to just say anecdotally, as one that processes all this information, we interview hundreds of people all the time. I can just tell you, you know, the crews, just anecdotally, I always come away with, boy, if the operator or the pilot had just had a little bit more help in making the decisions. And also mentoring. You know, the pilots can be current, qualified, checked out, and then thrust out into the world. And it's if there's a way to actually mentor them and keep coaching them as they're operating, that's very helpful. And again, this is the problem we've had. Since way back when, I was amazed. I was a fixed wing pilot for many, many years before I got picked up by the Army Guard in my late 30s. And I was shocked, and I still am to this day, even though I've flown helicopters for a long time now. My colleagues are so reluctant to talk to air traffic. It's always been like a cultural thing that I think we've had to work through. So again, we look at that decision-making process. We look at more metal. And this graph is just real quick. I know y'all seen a million graphs, but the bottom line, for all my interviews is, what I find is the more decisions a pilot has to make, the more the quality decreases. So if all day long you've been deciding about go, no go, loads, weather, problems at home, what have you. At the end of the day, that's a bad time to suddenly try to decide if you want to press the mission or not, because I call it decision fatigue. I know, like after work, sometimes I'll pull up to a stop sign and I can't even decide if I want to try to pull out or not, because I've been making decisions all day. I can't make another one. So we just always try to look and see if there's help within organizations with the decision makers. So again, just what we've been talking about for the last 2 days, FSMS and ways to help with that decision-making process. Again, I only throw this up to be self-serving, shameless. This was me when I had hair, but I still remembered when I started flying helicopters, I was qualified, checked out, fully trained, PIC, but luckily for 6 months, I still had a grumpy, mean, surly bunch of warrant officers whacking me in the back of the head, mentoring me. And I've done accident investigations where I've seen someone like, maybe they're a heavy aircraft and they'll get slow on the downwind to the LZ and they'll lose tail rotor effectiveness or something. And I thought, wow, I did that too, but I had a mentor. And so anyway, just look at that. So in that regard, there are programs with AVP 200. It's been pretty successful with some of the flight schools where they can come up with mentoring programs for single pilot operations. They are trying to think of things they can put on helicopters called H-Guard, and you can use maybe the data off a Garmin or something where you can actually play back and monitor operations, not to scold pilots, but to perhaps sit down with them and say, hey, you got real slow on the downwind when you were heavy. You might think about that or something like that. Anyway, operational flight deck monitoring is the term, and we're hoping to go forward with that. And again, that's my rant there, talk to air traffic. It's free. When you go on the FAA.gov page, if you click right here on the accident incident data, you'll see that it'll pop up with these entries, and these are the entries. I showed you Ann Torgensen. She makes these every single morning. And if you just click on, the type aircraft you're interested in, click on that number, it'll show you what happened that day. And it gives a quick little synopsis of the event. And I liked what Steve said, about talking about what was in the helicopter flying book. So the thing we look at when we do accident investigation, are we in the FAA, are we doing our part? And so we go back and say, was the guidance correct? All the discussion like on, settling with power, vortex, ring vortex, what have you, is all that, are we doing our part in providing the guidance? And the same thing with the AIM. And I would say it looks like we are, at least from my view. This is just this is one of those the highly touted, we've heard about the go, no go decision making. I did one accident where I had 2 turned down, 1 accepted the mission. I have people out in your audience that were with me on this event where the aircraft got into convective weather and tried to turn away and hit a bluff. That was the result. But the thing that always stuck in my mind was when I arrived at the airport and started to drive towards this scene, I looked at the aircraft that had turned down that mission. And I went, wow, what a difference. So that's always stuck with me. So I just throw that out. So we got new challenges in accident investigation. We got lithium batteries. We got commercial space. Commercial space is increasing quite a bit. And I think I'm going to run out of time here pretty quick. But, nowadays the glass cockpit has replaced this. And so now there's challenges where, we used to be able to find telltale gauges and things, but now we have new information. Cybersecurity, so we're looking at all the vulnerabilities from cyber events that happen on aircraft, the paper environment, and all that. So, yes, sir?
Yes, we are, as you mentioned, running out of time here. So I was wondering if I could jump in the last couple of minutes to ask some questions that came across, if you mind.
Sure. I was going to show you one more on the drone strikes here. We've had several drone strikes on helicopters here, and it's documented. This was a picture of the helicopter as it's getting hit by the drone. So anyway, but yeah, I'm done. So ask away, sir.
Cool. Thanks, Pat. It's a lot of information, and I know even with all that information, it's really tip of the iceberg when it comes to accident investigations. Speaking just from experience, I have a couple of accident investigators in my office that we send out. I call them, they are 2 of a kind. Scott do a wonderful job. They work hand in hand with y'all. So,
okay. And thank you for your accident investigators. They've been very heroic. So they're great guys. So thank you.
Yeah, they are. First question I have is, the FAA office you lead is a small elite go team of accident investigation for the FAA. How does one rise to become an investigator for AVP 100? And likewise, how can someone get involved with your team?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm always shamelessly headhunting. So, you know, I always say, send me your resume. But yeah, we don't train people. We get people that have already been trained. So usually we'll get them. It could be from industry, or we get people like a flight standards inspector that sort of come up through the ranks and has been doing accident investigations for some time. But I will say, if you looked at my crew, it's a vast background of experience. So there's nothing that you have, there's no credential you have to get to be part of the team. It's just, you know, we do like some field experience. And so, because we throw them right into the mix.
Okay. And another question. Does your office participate in investigations outside the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. We just got back from the Air India Express that that tragically ran off the tabletop runway in India. We just did Pegasus and Turkey. So we travel all over the world. Wherever there's a U.S. manufactured aircraft by the Annex 13 guidance, we have a play. And so we're interested in all U.S. assets. So we do quite a bit.
Right. And it's sort of related on accidents you get involved with. When it comes to military, who really has jurisdiction? The NTSB, do they get involved? Does your office get involved, or is it all left up to the military?
Well, I jokingly say, who shows up with the most people with the most windbreakers wins. You know, so. But if it's military, we serve at the invite of the military. Like especially if it crashes on a military base, we have done several investigations. If I don't know if y'all realize, you know, about 1/3 of the military aircraft right now are in registry. You know, they're you know, all the aggressor squadrons like the Top Gun. Those are private operators that are contracted out to the military. So we'll typically work at the invite of the military. If the aircraft has a common type rating, let's say a C-135 is also a 707, those kinds of things we'll get involved with and ask to be involved, and usually we are. So it's sort of, it's all coordination. It's all coordination. We never horn in, it's all coordination.
And another similar, when you launch, and I think this would, might be one of the questions, but what kind of accidents do y'all launch for? Is it for small civil helicopter accident sites, which there maybe just be a fender bender, and no one's injured? Do you launch for that, or does NTSB show for those kind of accidents?
So, so we do have sort of a gradient on what's the threshold for launching. So fatals, somebody from FAA will show up for any fatal. So then when it's the fender bender, it's one of the things. It's about manpower and the severity. You know, you can still investigate from your desk, but if you're really serious about the investigation, of course, you need to show up. So what we look at is the more innocent the public, the passenger, the more we get involved. So Part 121 air carrier will definitely be involved. Then it goes down to maybe a Part 135. Yeah, we'll get involved. Someone that holds out to the public, scheduler service. For helicopters, just like the Calabasas, you know, that was a great media event with national interest. So that's the kind of thing we'll get involved. And just about, I'd say, most of the HIMSS flights, most of those, especially if they're carrying a patient, we'll probably get involved with those.
Pat, you have just try to find my mute button again. It's
Yeah.
Go from screen to screen. 'Cause everybody tell you I'm not the expert doing this.
Oh, you're a master.
Doing this, but I believe that brings us to the end of the time session for your presentation. Thank you for all the information and enlightening us to what actions your office does when it comes to accident investigation and a lot of things that are involved with it. And in this previous example or question was the launch, no launch type criteria.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's a lot of information there when it comes to accident investigation. I mean,
There is, and thank you, Steve. And just a real quick shout out because there's a whole lot of heroes out there that don't make it on the Smithsonian Channel that nobly go out to these things. So real shout out to all you people out there. Good job.
Yes, thank you, everybody. It's not easy launching. I know that just from experiences and people in my office, and it's amazing job that you all do. Thank you. Thanks, Pat. Okay, and I guess that actually closes out our safety conference for 2020. It's been a great 3 days. I hope you found a lot of good information here. Thank you to all of our presenters and to everyone who worked to help make this virtual conference possible. And thank you to the more than 2,000 who attended worldwide. I also want to thank everyone who brought this virtual conference to fruition. We've been planning on this conference being face-to-face, and then when the pandemic hit, we were figuring out, okay, do we have it? Skip another year. Went forward and said, well, let's do virtually. It's been 2 years since the last one. Want to keep the 2-year time frame here, and hopefully everybody found it helpful, even virtually. What I do every conference I MC at with these safety conferences, I do like to recognize Gene Trainer for the work he's done. Set up this conference very well, just like he's done for all the ones in the past. Thank you, Gene. And we hope that everyone is able to apply what they learned from this conference and improve the way we fly helicopters, operate, maintain them. So until next time, everybody, fly safe, and thank you.